Tuesday, the 7th of August. This is day 2 of hearing stream 3. We're dealing with a variety of zones, including the urban and open space zones, future urban zone, industrial zone, a range of centres, residential zones. My name is David McMahon. I'm the chair of this independent hearings panel, and I'm joined by, on my right,
Robin Cherry Campbell, Deputy Chair, Commissioner for CDC.
Kia ana, Naida Sims, Independent Commissioner and Representative of Ngāti Kahungunu, ki Wairarapa. Kia ora.
Alistair Plymouth, Commissioner for South Wairarapa District Council.
Craig Bowyer, Commissioner, Marsden District Council.
Thank you. Yesterday we heard from 5 or 6 officers presenting summaries of their Section 42A reports, and they fielded a number of questions from us. We also heard from 3 submitters yesterday, being Kiwi Rail, Greater Wellington Regional Council,
Heavy
Haulage Association, which presented an overview, and they'll be attending again on the 14th of October, hearing stream 3. The purpose of today's hearing is to hear from the remainder of the submitters, and we'll turn to the first submitter, Mr. Ward, in a moment. Just before we do, is there any procedural matters arising from yesterday? It's always a good sign. Excellent. Okay, in that case, Mr. Warren will invite you to come up to the table so that we can hear you clearly, and these proceedings are being recorded. They're not being live streamed unless you're zooming in. Okay. So there will be a record of these proceedings posted on the webpage, probably the day after the event in each case, but I'll get you to turn that off. This is an opportunity, Mr. Warren, for you to speak in support of your submission, which has been pre-circulated, and we have a 15-minute slot for you, and we may have some questions depending on what you tell us. So we're in your hands.
Okay, thank you, David, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Yeah, I understand my notes have been circulated already, so I will try to just give a brief overview and we can dive into issues. That works. Essentially, my submission and following notes have always focused on housing affordability as a key issue, and the invitation to consider whether particular rules in the general residential zone unnecessarily worsen housing affordability are in excess of their potential benefits addressing other issues. In my original submission, I covered many areas, but for this hearing, I'd like to focus on minimum lot sizes because I think they are the single greatest potential opportunity to support housing affordability, housing choice, housing variety, whatever you want to call it, with an incredibly small potential downside, in my view. I think I'd like to just iterate how critical affordable housing is. It is, to me, almost the issue which should be top of the list when we are making planning decisions. Housing is the largest, least flexible expense for most households in their weekly budgets. When people are feeling the pinch with their housing costs, they start skimping on food, healthcare, heating, transport, and other necessities. They accept substandard and unhealthy housing and defer maintenance on their homes. And they are often forced to relocate away from education, employment opportunities, established community, and social connections. The financial stress, insecurity and displacement from unaffordable housing has flow-on impacts on health, education, employment, life satisfaction, particularly for children growing up in unaffordable homes. And all of these issues have flow-on impacts, particularly economically and environmentally across at a social level. And we know that New Zealand has among the least affordable housing in the developed world by many metrics. And this pressure is increasingly being felt in the Wairarapa, causing, according to Ministry of Housing and Urban Development statistics, average rents in all three districts have effectively doubled in the last 10 years, with house prices more than doubling. I don't know anyone whose income has doubled in the last 10 years, certainly not mine. This is reflected in surging demand for public housing and other supports. I've always think back to a Wairarapa Times Age article I read, I think it was last year, that estimated that 9% of residents in the Wairarapa are living hand to mouth and requiring handouts to put food on the table. That'd be about 4,000 people. And the link between housing affordability and planning is well documented, notably by the New Zealand Productivity Commission and the New Zealand Infrastructure Commission, who estimated that New Zealand now builds 1/4 to 1/3 fewer homes in response to rising demand than our grandparents would have done. According to the latest Ipsos NZ Issues Monitor poll, which tracks what New Zealanders consider to be the most important issues, the cost of living and housing were the two most common answers to the most important issue facing our country, and they have been for most of the last 5 years in that survey. I think our planning decisions need to take this seriously. I think when we talk about housing affordability, voice and variety, we need to acknowledge the gravity of the housing affordability problem and the potential impacts that unaffordable housing has on people. And I think that removing minimum lot sizes, my most extreme view, but at least reducing them to the minimum viable size that we possibly could, would be one of the most effective means to support housing affordability. It removes an arbitrary floor on housing costs and would drive down the cost of land. It gives more people more options to pay what they actually want to or can afford for housing, and this would benefit everyone. In my view, minimum lot sizes are simply bad regulations. They neither effectively nor necessarily control the things they are supposed to control. I was provided with several reasons for minimum lot sizes in the section
42A
report, none of which I found convincing. I do not think minimum lot sizes are necessary or effective to control the density of buildings in an area. And that's density in terms of built form, which is the meaning of density that I think people actually think about when they think about the character of an area. It's not population density. I think if the same house has a family of 4 living in it, and then you subdivide that house into 2 units and there's 2 couples living in there, there's no difference to the street, maybe an extra mailbox and an extra car parked in the driveway. I do not think minimum lot sizes are necessary or effective to manage stormwater impacts, and I do not think they are necessary or effective to manage infrastructure demand. I think that their benefits do not outweigh their many costs, and their function is already performed more adequately by existing rules. I think it's time to move on from this outdated and arbitrary rule. I think, yeah, my notes go into more detail on the objections of the Section 42A report. I'm happy to dive into those if we want to discuss those, but happy to throw it open for questions at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. I'll just see.
I was going to ask, can we get a copy of the notes that you're?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the notes I'm reading are just a summarised version of.
Oh, it's only just come through. Okay, sorry, thank you. I did have a question. Is that all right?
Yes, please do.
You spoke about reducing or removing minimum lot size, and in your opinion, it won't impact council's infrastructure like stormwater and so forth. Are you actually aware of some of the towns in the Wairarapa that their wastewater systems are already under severe pressure, and the impacts that that would then have on already sort of compromised infrastructure by removing that? Have you taken that into account at all?
Yeah, it is my understanding that those towns are already preventing additional development from happening. They don't need minimum lot sizes to do that. They have found alternative means to stop development from happening because they don't have the infrastructure capacity. And I'll note that those towns have reached this point despite having minimum lot sizes this whole time. Minimum lot sizes have not prevented these towns from reaching a state where their infrastructure cannot support additional development. So that's why I don't think they are actually doing the job that they are supposed to be doing. And I don't think they're necessary to control further development because of infrastructure capacity. Does that make sense?
Not really. Maybe I didn't phrase my question.
I think the question was along the lines of, notwithstanding the current embargo on new connections to wastewater systems, it sounds like Masterton, Martinborough, that's a building act and a non-planning response to a current situation. If there's a need for on-site wastewater systems or on-site servicing, won't that go to the size of the allotment required?
I wasn't saying that they could use on-site services. What I was saying is councils have alternative means to ensure that development is proportionate and matches their infrastructure capacity besides minimum lot sizes. And that is exemplified by Greytown and Martinborough, which are controlling development without the use of minimum lot sizes. They haven't, drastically increased their minimum lot size to manage their infrastructure issues. They have used another means, and those means would remain available to councils in absence of a minimum lot size.
Any follow-up questions?
Thank you.
Alistair? Oh, sorry, Ken Craig.
In your statement, you advocated for the abolition of all lot sizes, correct?
The minimum lot size in the residential zone is what I'm
about
focusing on.
minimum viable size. Do you have any idea of what that could be, or are you advocating for the total abolition of these minimum lot sizes and intensification on small sites?
Yeah, the heart of my argument is to just remove them. I don't think they're necessary. I acknowledge that that's a very radical proposal, and I acknowledge that there's going to be a lot of resistance to doing that. So that's why I say that that's not the hill I'm going to die on. And I would support any reduction, and I already support that they have been reduced over the course of this process. I applaud that. But my challenge for this process is consider whether it could be removed entirely.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Just clarifying, that was the first thing I was going to clarify was, are you talking reducing lot sizes in greenfield approaches, or are you talking about infill, or both?
Both.
Okay. With that in mind, have you given any thought as to how that could change the character and nature of the town if you start infilling? Take Greytown, for example, which is a small town with a very small street, about 100 metres of a town centre. They're changing the very nature of the town and the reason why people come to live in those towns. Have you given any thought as to that?
I think so. part of my notes challenge one of the responses from the Section 42A report, which was about density and the character issues of increasing density. And I think that existing rules, being height limits and setbacks, already largely control for what I think the psychological experience of density and character as you walk down a street. I think those are already controlled by setbacks and height limits, which, you know, removing minimum lot sizes doesn't let you build a sky tower in the middle of Greytown. And I would also note that I think that increasing population densities in Greytown might actually improve many of the things people move to Greytown for, because more people within this nice compact town within walking distance of these local businesses supports more of these local businesses and adds to this lively main street character which people love about Greytown. And I would thirdly, very hesitant for considerations of the lifestyles people want to be a big factor in this decision. I don't know if it's appropriate for us to decide for people whether having an affordable home or a bigger backyard or, you know, space for a vegetable garden. I don't think that's for us to decide. And I think we might very well find that there would be many people who would love to move to Greytown in a small unit and be able to walk to the lovely cafes and the beautiful library, and they might not need a big garden.
You just leading on from that, I'll ask you the same question I asked another presenter yesterday, in terms of the increased density has other implications for businesses because of certain legislation that we have in the country. And I'll use the sale and supply of alcohol, for example, in terms of noise and behavioural issues. Businesses, the potential of an increase of population could mean the very demise of the town of which you're trying to infill because of other legislation that requires certain behaviours and certain noise levels and certain so on and so forth. Have you given any consideration to that? So you sort of said, you know, the loveliness about being able to walk to cafes and so on, they could be impacted directly because of an increase in population size, because of smaller lot sizes and so on. So everything's interrelated here. There's no, you know, we can't just say lot size is the thing. Everything has to sort of fit together like a jigsaw. So looking at one part, have you looked at the impact of that particular part on other parts of that jigsaw?
Yes, and everything I've read leads me to believe that supporting greater densities would have overwhelming positive effects across so many domains, whether we're talking, because I think fundamentally what a lot of larger lots versus smaller lots comes down to is a car-oriented versus a pedestrian-oriented environment. And as population density increases, neighborhoods tend to move towards a more pedestrian-oriented environment, and a pedestrian-oriented environment has overwhelmingly positive effects on the viability of small locally owned businesses, on health, on the development of social connections and local institutions, the possibility of having the kind of independent childhood that fosters a sense of resilience, on road safety, pollution, cost of living for fuel and cars, and the sense of a unique local identity. I think all of those things are supported by smaller lots and more compact traditional neighbourhoods.
Okay. Could you possibly give me an example of a small town of about 3,000 people where intensification has had a positive effect on the future of that town?
No, not off the top of my head, but I believe the principles are solid. And I think the converse is, I think it's very, I don't think the status quo is working. So I don't. Yeah, I don't think we can assume the status quo is working when we talk about counterfactuals like that.
I keep going.
Thank you, Mr. You've got more?
I've got more.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Yep.
No, it's okay.
Did you go and do a presentation or go through the spatial planning process with South Wairarapa?
No, I live in Carterton.
Okay. You talk a bit in your submission about car parks. So I'd like to,
Oh, right, my original. Yeah.
sorry? Yeah, your original submission. And you've advocated that the urban development apply across all the towns for car parking restrictions. So getting rid of car parks.
Yeah.
How this is a very rural district, extremely rural. How do you and most people, the vast majority of people, certainly in South Wairarapa, don't work in the town in which they live. How do you propose that problem gets resolved?
Yeah, I acknowledge just in my submission, what's important for me with car parking requirements is simply that you're not forced to provide one. Most developers will continue to build driveways when they build homes because they know that most Wairarapa residents probably have a car that they want to park off the street. All I'm saying is we should provide the opportunity for some people to take punt and provide houses that don't have a driveway for the households who might not have a car they want to park off the street. I think I haven't seen for the latest census, but I know in the last census, I think it's about 10% of households in the Wairarapa don't own a car. That's already, a sizable number. There are many, elderly households who can't drive anymore. They can't, so I think the plan should have the flexibility to support different lifestyles, and there should be comfort in knowing that so long as cars are still needed by many people, they will continue to be provided.
So effectively, you're probably looking for a bit more flexibility in the rules rather than mandatory.
Yeah, well, I just don't think this is an issue that needs to be regulated by the district plan. I think market forces are quite good at providing car parking.
Okay, cool. Thank you. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughan. Just a couple of follow-up ones from me, returning to the subdivision topic. You'll be familiar with the government's MDRS proposal in terms of intensification for tier 1 and tier 2 authorities. How does that deal with subdivision? What guidance can we take from that medium density residential standards approach that government?
I'm not across the details of.
If we were to remove or significantly reduce the minimum allotment size, how would that pan out where subdivision occurs ahead of land development and that there is no known building at a particular time? And for example, a developer might produce a layout for a greenfield site or for a series of infill in a future urban zone, but it's left up to individual owners to then construct the dwellings. How would the council deal with allotment size under that scenario when there's no minimum? How would they be able to determine whether the allotment size was sufficiently large enough to accommodate future dwellings?
this is where I acknowledge I'm not a planner, and that's why I've been sneaking in this minimum viable. I assume, obviously, setbacks set an ultimate limit on how small an allotment could get.
I mean, it could get to a ridiculous stage where very small allotments are created, which when then you apply the setbacks, the maximum height, building coverage, recession planes, and you have a building footprint that's unbuildable.
Yeah, and I suppose you'd hope the developers would think about it a bit more before they do that. I note that there are no minimum allotment sizes in many of the zones. I think many of the mixed-use town centre, neighbourhood centre, and the industrial zone.
The non-residential zones.
Yeah. So I think the same issue would theoretically apply to all of those zones, but I assume...
Acknowledge there is some practical consideration to consider there.
Theoretically, but these zones haven't had minimum lot sizes.
No, I'm not talking about the residential zone.
Yeah, but we're talking about just subdivisions, and it would appear that developers have the nous in the industrial and mixed use and town centre zones not to create allotments.
We'd hope so.
Bring a lot of faith in developers.
Okay, I think I've probably taken that as far as I can. Thank you, Mr. Warren, for your presentation. And the process from here on is that the panel will continue on hearing submissions, and there will be a reply from the council officers that take account of all the material that they've heard, and that'll be within 10 to 15 working days of the close of this hearing. That'll be posted on the webpage.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Hey, the next submitter I think is online, Mr. Matthew Wendon. Mr. Wendon, I can see you here. Welcome.
Thank you.
You can hear us all right, I can imagine.
Yes,
Thank
yes,
you.
I can hear you okay.
Mr. Wyndham, we've got your original submission 175. Don't believe you've circulated any additional written material to date.
No, I haven't circulated any additional material. My submission today, or my verbal submission today, is only going to be relatively short.
Okay.
I'm only covering the same 2 points that I raised in my original submission.
Okay. In that case, the floor is yours. Please proceed.
Thank you. So just as a brief bit of background, my name is Matthew Wendon. I am a senior associate and urban designer at Mackendall Urban, a Wellington-based urban design consultancy firm. I'm also a resident of Paitimokai, Featherston, and I'm presenting today just in my capacity as a resident, not as a professional. So I have 2 points to raise about the general residential zone, particularly around the format and structure of the residential design guide and the application of the medium density residential precinct. So first point is around the residential design guide. So the current format of the design guide preferences are sections that are only relevant to small areas, the heritage precincts in particular. Those are kind of located up front, or they are in the submissions version. So in terms of the application of design guides, they're generally twofold. First, from a landowner or designers acting on a specific, first from a landowner or designer acting on a specific site. And then the second use is in the review and assessment of resource consents coming in. So in my experience of preparing urban design assessments against design guides on behalf of local authorities around the country, any duplication or conflict within these design guides creates a lot of unnecessary extra time and cost in assessment. not to mention the uncertainty and risk to the developer or designer in terms of which areas of the design guide to follow. So the current kind of format of the design guide does introduce a few duplications of points that could result from inconsistencies in interpretation. While I haven't gone through and I identified each of these, my submission is just seeking that in the final version of these, a fine-tooth comb is taken through to just ensure that similar issues aren't dealt with under different subheadings. It's an issue that has just been kind of at the forefront of the Wellington plan change in the residential design or design guide residential in Wellington. In the end, was essentially thrown out and rewritten during the panel process, and it was largely due to too many points in the design guide, too many areas where there was possible conflict in terms of how that was interpreted by whether it be planners or urban designers doing the final assessment for resource consent. The second point for the residential design guide is just the order in which it is presented. So as I mentioned before, the current format preferences the heritage sections up front. These really only apply to very specific geographically located areas within the various cities of towns of the Wairarapa. So I would like to see those heritage sections moved just to the rear of the design guide. That way the section of the guide that applies to the much larger area of residential around the region is up front, and the first thing that is accessible, particularly to landowners and designers. Working with authorities around the country, on behalf of councils, I often find during pre-application meetings or subsequent interaction with designers and landowners that a lot of them don't even read the district plans, and they only very briefly interact with any design guidance. They tend to put forward submission or proposals that and then rely on the planners or urban designers to tell them where they've gone wrong. So the more we can do to make sure that it is simple and accessible for those designers and landowners to interact with, the better. And hopefully the more interaction that will happen ahead of bringing council officers or consultants into that mix, because that's just going to save everybody time and money in the long run. My second point was just around the medium density residential precinct. At the moment, it identifies areas in Masterton. This is almost more of a question than a point, which is there's an emerging Featherston master plan that is currently going through, or it has been through the hearings process at the moment. That plan identifies areas of medium density residential areas within Featherston, although I see that these are not included in the proposed district plan. And so my question was whether that document that is being prepared within South Wairarapa at the moment has been taken into account in terms of the application of the residential precincts, whether that is a further work project to take place once the document is finalised. So thank you very much for your time. That's all the prepared material that I had. So I can open up to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wendon. I can respond to that last matter first regarding the medium density residential precinct. The 42A officer for the residential zone, Ms. Wheatley, has made a recommendation that the MDR be applied to parts of Featherston in her section 42A report. That was canvassed yesterday in the hearing also. So that's right off latest information off the press, so to speak.
Okay, thanks very much. That's great to hear.
Okay. In terms of the urban design, residential design guide, sorry, I'll just see if there's any questions from my colleagues.
Says documents submitted. I don't see. I
Can we get a question of the speaking notes? Question of the speaking notes?
Yes.
Mr. Wendon, it says on our document that you submitted a document with your submission. Did you submit your changes that you were contemplating in the design guide?
No, I didn't. I'm not sure. As far as I'm aware, I didn't attach anything in my original submission. There was a note in my original submission that said that I would like to prepare some additional information, but essentially work got busy and I haven't had the opportunity to do that.
If you wouldn't mind, Mr. Wendon, emailing a copy of your notes through to the hearings administrator so that we've got a copy on the record.
Yes, of course.
Yes. I've got a couple of questions. You're one of the few submitters that have raised concerns about the residential design guide. And I can understand with your background why you're taking interest in that. I'm also familiar with what happened in the Wellington City, the residential incentives design guide there. I was on the panel there, and yes, there was a major rewrite of that document. Are you suggesting that the residential design guide in the Wairarapa is fits into the same category in terms of needing a significant rewrite?
No. I think the design guide here is a lot. It's a lot tighter to begin with. It's a lot smaller than the original Wellington one was, and I think it is more along the lines of some small amendments rather than a substantial rewrite. Particularly as I was going through, I noticed a few areas where if I was doing an assessment based on it, you would end up having to address the same kind of issues under several of the subheadings. And so it's just a case of kind of consolidating those to avoid that level of repetition and assessment.
Yes.
So yeah, more along the lines of small edits rather than a substantial rewrite is required.
Sure. That creates a little bit of a quandary for the panel in that the design guide is part of the district plan. Any changes to it that are substantive need to be the result of a specific submission identifying the need for that change so that other parties can be aware of the changes requested and either support or oppose those. So I think the panel is going to need to have some consideration about how far we can take your submission. We'll give that some thought. And if we think there's some merit in that, we might direct discussion between yourself and Ms. Moore, who were present yesterday. But that would be strictly on the basis that the changes were more format type changes as opposed to substantial alterations that would change the intent and direction of the design guide. So if we were to direct that, would you be available and willing to partake in that?
Yes, I would be willing to engage in that.
Yes. That aside, the application of the design guide, i.e. when it's triggered in relation to bulk and location exceedances, the number of units and heritage precinct type matters, presumably you're happy with when it comes into play?
Yes, yeah, I'm happy with where that comes into play.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Wendon. That's all from the panel. If you could email your speaking notes through to Ruth, that would be much appreciated.
Yes, will do. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Brings us to our third submitter for this morning. Is that Mr. Bergen? Bergen, you're on mute at the moment.
That's a good start. Yes, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Bergen. My name's David McMahon. I'm the chair of the hearings panel, and I'm joined by 4 colleagues who form the panel, a mixture of councillors who are acting as independent commissioners and iwi representatives also acting as independent commissioners. We have a copy of your submission. That's the original submission. I don't believe you've submitted any further information in support of that ahead of this hearing.
No, I haven't.
No, that's fine. In that case, the opportunity is now for you to talk in support of your original submission.
Okay. When the council put out its first draft of the district plan, it envisioned having land that's bordered by Upper Plain, Chamberlain Road and West Bush Road as future urban. And that's the west side of Chamberlain Road. In a subsequent iteration, that has been changed back to another designation, which I can't help you with, but it's certainly not special rural because I understand you're getting rid of that. So my submission is that your original instinct was correct. It's a very developable area. I have quite a few points that would point in that direction, and I would say I can only speak for my property, although I would wager that this also stands for the other properties along Chamberlain Road towards West Bush. But I'm making my representation just on behalf of myself, if that makes any sense.
Yes, understood.
Okay. If you taking a sort of like a step back, the helicopter view of the town, we're really well served through State Highway 2 and both sides of State Highway 2 in terms of housing. What we're not really so well served is housing around our rail network. If you look at a picture of the town map, we're almost exclusively to the east of the rail. And I believe that's a missed opportunity. The government said they're going to spend a lot of money on the rail network. As and when that comes through, we need to see. And it would tend to make me think that growth in the town is going to be commuter driven, or people being forced out of Wellington because of prices, which is one and the same in effect. So the area I'm talking about, this side of Chamberlain, specifically my property, is in walking distance of 2 stations. There are some local shops, although I realise that's not a major point, and there's a bus route that goes in here. So it's very well served with access to public transport, which would make commuting basically a dream from this area. Specifically, I would say that my property, if I put it before you and it was already future urban, I would imagine it would just get a tick in the box because I've got so many features of where I live fit my understanding of the subdivision rules of the council. Now, I put all of those in my submission. Would I go through them again, or was that clear enough of the way I put it?
Well, this is your opportunity to convince us, Mr. Bergen, so I don't want to constrain you unnecessarily, but we might.
That's very nice. Okay, one thing that I've kind of glossed over is there's a lot of talk or discussion as to whether we should or should not develop farmland and various types of farmland. I can say anecdotally, I've lived here for 25 years as in inverted commas, lifestyle block, and any effort that I've made to make any money out of this place in terms of, again, inverted commas, farming, be it horticulture or running a few animals, has fallen flat on its face. None of the area properties around me, specifically adjacently, have ever been used for anything other than lifestyle blocks in the 25 years I've been in the town. So I don't believe that this is first-class land, nor do I think there's going to be any loss to the farming community if we choose to develop in this part of town. Now, specifically with my place, one of the things that I think is quite often difficult with access to properties when they're not adjacent to the road is access. Well, my place has got a 15-metre access, which should allow a fair amount of traffic under your rules. There's been a significant upgrade in the waste and water management over the years, specifically to do with the hospital across the road. And I know there's a lot of work been done at the roundabout down at Reynolds Street, so that shouldn't particularly be an issue. Again, as I say, public transport is excellent, and I can't see how developing certainly my property, whether the rest are included, would do anything other than be positive to the town. I also noticed, I listened to some stuff yesterday where it talked about the council's plan and in terms of the number of houses that you wish to provide over, pardon me, the coming years. And I'm struggling to see with what was put forward that there is enough land being put up for development. Now, that's not my area of expertise, but maths is, and I just don't think that the number of houses, I think somebody mentioned 7,000, would that be right? Anyway, I can't see that being fitting into the Chamberlain area to the other side of the road or up in Lansdowne. I just don't think we've got the capacity. So there we are. That was my fairly simplistic idea of why things should change. Is there anything else that I can say or not say that would help?
We'll just check to see whether there are any specific questions.
Surely.
Mike?
Yes, Paul, thank you very much for your presentation. Just wanting to clarify that your land sits on an overlay of highly productive land. It is of your opinion that your land is not highly productive?
Yeah, absolutely. That's by trial and error rather than just some sort of opinion. When I first got here, I thought it was suitable for horticulture, so I planted olives and lavender, and they failed miserably for horticultural reasons rather than my ineptitude. That's as nice a way as I can put it. I've also tried to run a few stock, and yes, that keeps the freezer full, but it just doesn't support stock numbers that would even begin to be economic. So I basically say that whether the land is designated top quality or not, my experience is that it just doesn't support farming in its widest sense.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alistair, do you have any? Nothing. Nothing.
Yeah.
Mr. Bergen, your submission referenced the planning map that was part of the draft district plan, which showed the spatial extent of the FUZ. Is your submission seeking the reinstatement of that area in full from the draft plan through to the notified plan, or are you modifying that in some way?
Okay, well, I can answer that in two ways. As a person that lives in Marston, I would like to see it reinstated in full. I think it's an area of an easy area to develop in terms of where it fits into the infrastructure of the town. That said, I haven't canvassed anybody else that lives around me, and so I don't want to put forward the idea that I'm speaking for other people.
Right.
So specifically, I would like to see my area changed, but in a general sense, I'd like to see the whole idea reinstated.
Yes.
If that makes any logical sense.
Yes. Do you think on its own, your property is a viability to be included as part of the future urban zone?
I do, because I've actually made pains to keep axes, if that's the right word. As I've actually got 3 ways into this place. We've got wired access. You could, because of the hospital across the road, I also think there's a possibility that the Masonic Village will wish to expand at some point. So I think it kind of ticks a lot of boxes. And yes, I think you could get a decent amount of houses on here and provide a lot of revenue for the council in terms of rates and so on and so forth.
Yes. Can you just remind me of the land holding area of your property?
I might not have that exactly, but it's about 4.2 hectares.
0.2 hectares, okay. And it's a regular shape, isn't it?
Yes, it's basically a rectangle.
Yes. Okay. Panel might be of a mind to come and visit this site to view it firsthand. If we were to arrange that down the track, would you have any objections to that?
Absolutely not. I'm retired now, so as long as you don't interrupt my coffee.
No.
I might be managed to put a pot on, but yes, absolutely.
It's not an opportunity for you to remind us of your concerns. It's just an opportunity for us to familiarise with the property and understand from a first-hand experience what
Yes, absolutely. I mean, to be honest, you're welcome to have access at any time. I don't even have to be here. You know, if that's the way you'd like to set it up, then that can be done.
Okay. What I'm going to do just now is just check with Ms. Robertson, see whether she has any questions of factual clarification that
Not at this stage.
not at this stage. Okay. Something I like to do, Mr. Bergen, just to make sure nothing's left untouched on the day of the hearing. So, but Ms. Robertson's indicated she understands what you're saying and she doesn't have any questions of factual. So, unless there are any others. Yeah. I don't have any further questions, Mr. Bergen. So thank you for your presentation. The process now is within 3 weeks of this hearing, the officers will provide a written right of reply, which will take into account presentations from all submitters such as yourself, and they'll indicate whether they've changed their recommendation in any way. And then the panel will convene to deliberate on the matters, and that may include the site visit. Then, in due course, we'll issue our recommended decisions, but that won't be until next year.
Okay, that sounds marvelous.
Okay, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yes, I did. You gotta watch it.
Watch you.
Put your name on it.
Yeah.
Just put your initials on it.
Oh, yeah, they should, yeah, they had that. Oh, yeah, they had that last week. No, that's fine.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah. That highlighted. Yeah. Yes. Just I'll get that screenshot of that.
Thank you. I won't bother saying that again. Thanks.
Fine.
Mr Chair, are you happy for me to send that directly or would you like it to go through?
And it to all of us. Just give us a few minutes to get.
Yeah, no problem.
It'd be useful if we had a screen, screenshot of the location of the property. Just waiting for Ruth to return so we can have that in front of us. Something I should have done with the last submitter. But we'll try and do that now on. Submitters talking about specific properties. Just while we're waiting, welcome, Donaldson. Thank you for taking the opportunity for being present yesterday. I think that not all submitters have the luxury of being able to do that, so I appreciate you taking the time to do that because it helps give you a picture of the full range of material that's in front of the panel. And we'll make a start, and I think when Ruth comes, we'll try and get a copy of that image up on the screen. I've got a copy of the summary planning statement and statement of funds. That's short. So we also have a copy of original planning evidence and the transportation urban design, emanated land and services reporting. Take us through your presentation.
Yeah, no problem. Kia ora tātou, ko Debbie Donaldson tako ingoa. He kai whakariti mātua ahau ke Kahu Environmental. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Debbie Donaldson. I'm a Principal Planner at Kahu Environmental, which is a resource management consultancy based in Greytown. I'm here today to provide planning evidence in respect of the submission by Canoe Wines Limited Partnership. Firstly, I'd just like to pass on my apologies from Mr. Jay Short, who's the Director of Canoe Wines Partnership, and he's the owner of the site at 3 Roberts Street. Unfortunately, they've travelled from overseas and he is very ill this morning, so I was unable to make it. He does send his apologies and obviously had provided a written statement to the panel last week. And he wanted me to reiterate that he'd be more than happy to provide a response to any questions should the panel have any.
Yes, we've got a statement, and if that is the procedure we'll follow, if there are any questions, we'll put those in writing through Ruth and send them through to you.
Perfect, yeah. In addition to that, Mr. Short also advises that he would be happy to direct the technical experts who provided submissions on the technical reports and expert evidence that accompanied the submission to respond to any questions if the panel has any of those as well. So I suppose, now we've got it up on site. So
You want to just orientate us here?
yes, yeah. So where the cursor is the site at 3 Roberts Street in Martinborough. So if Ruth, if you scroll out a little bit, you'll see the town square in the middle there. Basically the big blocks which are kind of on the other side of Roberts Street from the site that's Martinborough School.
Do you want to just get up?
Yeah, shall I do a bit of pointing?
Watch out for all the cables.
Yeah, sure it has. Okay, so yeah, we've obviously got the Martinborough Town Centre there. This is Martinborough School, and this is the site. These are residential properties, well, in residential use currently zoned under the operative plan as rural, and proposed as residential.
Proposed.
In the proposed plan. This is the large park. Is it Constantine? Yeah, I always keep naming that one. And there is existing residential properties surrounding. So these ones are all in operative residential zoning. I believe these ones here are rural and will retain rural. And then there's another block down here which was rural and is proposed as future urban.
Just stay there, Ruth. Are you put the zoning overlay on that? Don't have.
Yes.
Well, hang on, let's just see, let's see the operative.
Oh, sorry, the lines. So it all looked yellow.
That's all.
Yeah, it's not easily distinguishable.
So I think you can say,
That's rural special all around it, and that lighter one is residential.
yeah, so residential.
I'll put the property.
Yeah,
I'll
it is.
pass it on.
It's a little bit difficult to say. Oh, yeah. It's
So the current zoning of the site is
rural special
rural special.
under the operative, yes, under the plan, yeah, and under the proposed that's future this.
And sorry to, that's fine, we're all good with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the proposed zoning overlay?
I've joined, I've got up on my screen if you want to stop sharing.
You need to get her information.
Erica's got it, so she's going to share.
Oh, awesome.
Right.
And that's a bit clear. Yeah, so that up the top is rural,
Yes,
and then you've got, future urban zone.
yes. And those allotments along the front of Roberts Road, on the northwestern side of Roberts Road are zoned residential, low density, are they?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, they are.
And as are the ones in the block to the further between Grey and.
Yeah, so all of these
Yes.
are zoned.
Yes. And I see there's a
Residential.
further future urban zone further.
Yes, yeah. So that block there was also included within the spatial plan that I can talk about.
Yes.
And then maybe if you zoom out. Sorry.
Okay.
Just in terms of context as to where other future urban
Yes.
zone locations are in comparative size and things. You've got the Ferry Road, the urban zone, which has obviously got 2 large landowners, and then this, the Oxford Street one, which has obviously got multiple landowners there.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's really useful. We might just leave that up at this stage.
I can.
Would you like me to zoom back into the site or leave it there?
Is it back into the site? That would be good. That's really useful orientation. Thank you, Ms. Donaldson.
So hopefully that provides you with a bit of context going into this statement. Just as you will see in my evidence, my qualifications and experience are set out in paragraphs 2 to 8. And in paragraphs 10 to 16, I outline that I've been providing expert planning evidence to Canoe Wines in relation to the South Wairarapa spatial plan process, the draft Wairarapa combined district plan process, and the proposed district plan process since about 2020. And I produced the planning report, which was attached to the Canoe Wines submission. Just the notified plan identified the site at 3 Roberts Street and future urban zone. Canoe Wines made a submission that opposed the future urban zone applied to the site and asked for the site to be zoned as general residential zone with a low density overlay. No further submissions were received on the Canoe Wines submission. The Section 42A report for the future urban zone prepared by Ms Robinson and Ms Adams recommended that the submission rezone the site as general residential is rejected on the basis that a spatial plan and or structure plan process is required before the zoning on the site can occur, that Canoe Wines could apply for a private plan change to rezone the site, and that the site should be zoned future urban until wastewater capacity is available in Martinborough. Just touching on a point that was raised yesterday by the chair. Following the release of the Section 42A report, I initiated a pre-hearing meeting with the Section 42A officers, Ms Robinson and Ms Adams. The intention of this meeting was to gain a further understanding of the reasoning behind the recommendations made by the 42A officers in the report. This meeting was held on the 5th of August. Ms Robinson and Ms Adams attended the meeting along with Mr Gorman and Mr Eagle, Wairarapa District Council. As confirmed yesterday, Mr O'Leary was not present at that meeting. During the meeting, I provided an overview of the submission raised by Canoe Wines, highlighting the technical evidence provided to support the submission. And the 42A officers indicated that in making their recommendation, they had relied on information provided to them by South Wairarapa District Council and that their recommendation reflected the position taken by SWDC. The officers and the council officers indicated that they wanted to discuss the matter further between themselves and have time to further consider the information in the submission. So Canoe Wines Partnership and myself went on to prepare and submit evidence, obviously, following that date, answer the 42A report. I didn't receive any further response from the Section 42A officers other than some brief conversations with Ms Robinson last week, who did confirm that South Wairarapa would maintain their position to recommend that the submission was rejected and that Mr O'Leary would be providing a statement to this effect. So Mr. O'Leary provided that statement in response to the submission and recommended, obviously, that that was rejected. So that just to provide a bit more background. I'll now just provide a brief overview of my evidence. The outline within evidence, from my evaluation of the relevant statutory and policy documents, the technical evaluations included within the Canoe Wines Limited submission, and the relevant matters in Section 32 of the Resource Management Act, it's my opinion that the zoning of the site as a general residential zone is the most appropriate resource management approach for managing subdivision use and development of the site. The general residential zoning is consistent with the identification of the site in the mid-residential growth area for Martinborough in the South Wairarapa District Council spatial plan, and that details on that spatial plan process are outlined in paragraphs 44 to 48. It's my opinion that a structure plan process is not necessary, and this has been signalled, as this has not been signalled as required in the spatial plan or within the proposed district plan, and I talk about that at paragraphs 51 to 63 of my evidence. That the council's position of preferring a private plan change process rather than the current plan review process to rezone the site is inefficient, and that's at 64 to 73 of my evidence. And that the notified general residential zone provisions and subdivisions of the subdivision provisions of the proposed plan will be effective and efficient in managing subdivision use and development of the site, including to prevent or limit development until wastewater capacity is available in Martinborough. And again, that's, yeah, at 74 to 84 of my evidence. So in terms of Section 32 assessment of this option, Section 9 of my planning report attached to the submission provides a Section 32 assessment of the option to rezone the site as general residential zone. And I refer to this assessment in 85 to 91 of my evidence. Neither the council's Section 32 report or the Section 42A report identified the rezoning of the site from future urban to general residential as a reasonably practical option, or evaluated this option in accordance with Section 32. This is despite this option being identified in the submission of Canoe Wines on the draft district plan. So this was submitted prior to the council's completion of Section 32 reports, and in correspondence with South Wairarapa District Council in 2021 and 2022. The Section 42A officers and Mr. O'Leary have stated that they consider the future urban zone as appropriate as a holding zone until wastewater capacity is available. However, they have not identified why this option is a more efficient or effective planning mechanism than the option to rezone the site as general residential, as identified in Canoe Wines' submission. They have not identified any disadvantages or costs for the option to rezone the site for general residential, or provided any assessment or comments on my Section 32 assessment provided in the planning. The Section 42A officers have not provided any expert technical evidence to contest the findings of the Canoe Wines expert reports or to underpin their planning conclusions. The summary statement prepared by Mr. O'Leary refers to the technical reports but does not provide any analysis of these reports. It is my opinion that the current plan review process allows a rezoning request to be considered, and there is sufficient information to make a decision on that request. Then it is efficient to use this current process. The information provided by Canoe Wines in their submission provides a comprehensive evaluation of the matters that would, in my experience, be typically considered when master planning or structure planning process and through a private plan change process. This information is available to the council to consider through this current plan review process. At paragraph 58 of my evidence in section 6 of the planning report, I also highlight the unique features of this site that distinguish it from other areas identified as future urban zone and that make this site suitable for rezoning through this district plan review process. I'll just turn briefly now to the wastewater kind of issue. As outlined in the statement of Mr. Shaw and within my evidence, there's no contention to the fact that there's no wastewater capacity in Martinborough. That's a fact. As far as I'm aware, the council has not publicly identified definitive timeframes when wastewater capacity is likely to become available. However, Mr. O'Leary stated yesterday that he considers additional wastewater capacity is likely to become available within several years within the life of the plan. I'd like to highlight that the capacity issue is not unknown or unresolvable. It's a matter of timing. The general residential zone and subdivision sections of the plan includes provisions that restrict any residential zone site, restrict development on any residential zone site until infrastructure capacity is available. These provisions are summarised in my planning report. Probably just like to draw the panel's attention to a few of those provisions. So policy, subdivision policy 2, which notes that requiring subdivision to be located where appropriate infrastructure is available, and then it says by ensuring appropriate infrastructure has the capacity to accommodate development or anticipated development of the land in accordance with the purpose of the zone is in place at the time of subdivision and development. So that's that. It's not proposed that subdivision and development would occur now on the site, obviously, and we've.
Yep. In relation to policy GRZP7, which is the first.
Oh, sorry, I missed that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whether that could be read as a plan making policy opposed to a consideration policy at the time of resource consent.
Well, I would say because currently there is no wastewater capacity, that applies to both greenfield and existing urban areas. So given that context, I think that it is it could be a plan making, but it's also probably reflective of the current situation where there is a need to avoid development until there is sufficient capacity.
Sorry, to clarify that you would see the actual development of a site different from a zoning issue.
Yep.
Okay, that's.
I mean, the zoning obviously would facilitate the development of the site through a more straightforward pathway.
So you would acknowledge that if this was zoned general residential, you wouldn't be able to develop it anyway, given the constrictions there are currently in place, and these policies would still reaffirm that.
Yes, yeah, and this is kind of highlighting that there are those provisions in place that would send a very clear signal that development is not possible on the site until there's wastewater capacity available.
I understand that in relation to development, but is the policy directing a zoning response?
Well, I would say that the zoning response is identified through the planning maps, and that has identified properties as residential zone. And if that was, I would see that policy would better fit if that was the case in the future urban zone, if it was directing that plan changes couldn't occur from future urban zone to residential, if it would be better placed in the future urban zone to direct that.
Okay. If it was a zoning directive, I presume it would use different terminology other than residential development. It would perhaps reference zoning as a technique to be avoided.
Yes, yeah. And given that it is that policy is located within the residential zone, it is applying to properties that are residentially zoned already.
Thank you.
There's a number of standards within the one standard in particular within the subdivision chapter that requires all allotments must be provided with a connection to council's reticulated wastewater systems. For a controlled activity subdivision, then you must meet those standards for it to be a controlled activity, and that includes that standard 4. The controlled activity also includes a matter of control that states that provision of appropriate infrastructure.
So could I just, yesterday the chair asked a question of Mr. O'Leary and said that should this be rezoned to GRZ, adding additional covenants onto it, for want of a better word, would you suggest that the rules already there would not require those?
Yes. Yeah, I mean,
they're covered already.
Yes, I do.
Ms. Donaldson, what's the default activity status for non-compliance with standard 4?
I believe it's restricted discretionary, and then there are matters of discretion. But can I just double check
Please do.
that as well? I think it goes to RD, and there are matters of discretion which also talk about the bylaw, infrastructure bylaws as well, to touch on. So, the top of my head, sorry. Also, just on the bylaw, since preparing my evidence, I've reviewed the Wairarapa Consolidated Bylaw Part 8 for wastewater, and in particular, Section 7 requires approval to connect, and the bylaw prescribes that there must be written approval from the council for any wastewater connections. So it is my opinion that if the site was zoned general residential zone, the council can manage development on the site using the provisions of the proposed plan, and other methods, including the bylaw, until wastewater capacity is available. Using rules to limit development until infrastructure capacity constraints are resolved is an effective planning mechanism, and that the council has already proposed this for managing development in other parts of the general residential zone. Zoning for development in anticipation of upgrade work being completed, in my opinion, is logical and efficient. And that kind of provides a summary, but thank you very much for your time, and I'll be happy to answer any further questions.
Let's see if there are the questions.
No, thank you. It's a really good presentation. Having the map up there has been really useful. Yeah, just for that.
We'll do that in
Thank you.
future.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Yeah, very comprehensive submission. Thank you.
I actually do have one. All the other papers that have been submitted by other experts.
Yeah.
If this was to stay future, you were then to do another plan change. Is there any other information that you would suggest that would need to be required for that, or do you think everything there is enough to actually warrant it now?
No, in my experience, what the premise behind providing all of this information in the submission is that effectively this plan review process is kind of can be used as almost a private plan change process, and so be looking to exactly the same information. I suppose one of the things is that obviously a delay reports would be updated, but that would be, I imagine, not it's really the process that involves. So a private plan change process is another, obviously, process that the applicant and the council have to go through. There's obviously time and resource associated with that. There's notification requirements, there's hearing requirements, and so it is more efficient that if the information is available, that is considered now. The other thing that I think I've highlighted in my evidence to be aware of, is that obviously if a a private plan change is the council can reject an application for a private plan change if it's made within 2 years of a plan being made operative. So that means that obviously that the applicant can't guarantee that the council would accept a private plan change application. But that is, I believe the premise behind that is that obviously these matters have already been considered through a recent process, and therefore it wouldn't need to be considered again. So it would be obviously up to the council's discretion as to whether or not they accepted that private plan change, or if it was the plan was still posed. So because of appeals or things and that dragged out, then it would anything would need to be a variation, which would have to be council initiated.
Thank you. Mr. Donaldson, you've covered most of my questions up front. Just a couple of additional ones from me. Request to have the area zone GRZ would come with a lower density residential precinct applying. You're not seeking any other.
No, and that was just for consistency with that surrounding residential area.
Yes.
Yeah. And the basis of the master plan that was attached to that technical report has used that low density as a guide.
Can you just remind me, and sorry, I'm just being lazy, that the yield.
I think it's between about 42 and 50, depending on layouts. There was a few options that were identified within that. Yeah.
Aside from the answer you gave to Commissioner Plummer regarding being able to rely on standard 4 in relation to wastewater.
Oh, yes.
Envisage any other bespoke provisions that would be needed over and above the general provisions in the GRZ for the site if it was to be rezoned?
No. We considered, well, I considered that quite heavily when preparing the submission. But whether or not that adds complexity to the plan, that doesn't need to be there when the existing provisions already do the job. But I can consider that further.
But the fact that you haven't suggested a submission would indicate to the panel that you don't think there are any necessary that the provisions of the GRZ be applied if we were of a mind to recommend that zoning change.
And I think as well, being mindful that those provisions are proposed to work for the existing town, which would include any infill subdivision and development as well. So obviously the council has considered that would work for that process. So
yes,
they haven't provided a reason why it should be differentiated for Greenfield.
Yes. Your paragraph 58 of your evidence in chief, you outline some factors that unique to the site and don't go to the buying a master plan or a structure plan. What extent are those factors applicable or not applicable to other future urban zoned? Yes.
If you look in my planning report at page,
I might not just have that in. Oh, yes.
At page 17, table 1 provides a comparison of some of those factors compared to all of the other future urban zones within identified in Martinborough. Obviously, some of them I haven't provided exact details, but I think you may have directed the Section 42A officers to do that in terms of land ownership.
Yes, we have in a tabular format.
Yes, yeah. So, I think that covers most of those points that I have raised.
Useful traffic light. Thank you. Finally, if the panel was of a mind to recommend zoning change, clearly everything points to resolving the wastewater situation before any development could proceed.
Yes.
Yep. And whilst that might be within the lifetime of the plan, it could be several years away. And
Yes.
your client understands that.
Yes. Well aware of that.
That's all from me. Thank you for your presentation.
Okay.
Good morning to you, German. Slightly behind time. And then we'll come back at just after between 1:45 and 10:02 to hear from Mr. Gusting. Hearing's good.